statement earlier from House Majority Whip Tom DeLay, also criticizing the administration. This has been a politically charged case from the beginning, so it is no surprise that some criticism is coming in. We have not received any reaction from the White House about this criticism, but the White House is steadfastly saying that it tried everything possible, the Attorney General and the INS, to try and bring out a voluntary transfer, and when that was not possible, today's raid was the only other solution. Kelly Wallace, CNN, reporting live from the White House.
Today's events in Miami raise a number of legal questions. For one, now that father and son are reunited, what are they permitted to do next?
And for some perspective on the many legal issues surrounding this case, we turn to our CNN legal analyst, Roger Kosick and Greta Van Susteren. Greta, to you first. The family in Miami is saying the government, in effect, was way out of bounds, that they had no right to come in and take this boy as they did.
Wrong. The government certainly had a right to go in and get that child. The way they did it may be offensive to many, but in terms of whether it was legal, whether it was lawful, the government certainly had the right to do it.
You know, there's no good way to do this. You know, apparently there's no way to just sort of knock on the door and say, hi, we're here, let's all get together, folks, hand me the child, I have to take him back to the father. What you saw was a planned raid, an INS raid. It's scary. These things are scary, but they certainly within their legal rights.
And I can understand, you know, why the family would say that. It must be terrorizing to have the police come battering in, or the law enforcement come battering in your house with guns drawn in essentially the middle of the night. 5 o'clock's the middle of the night for me, but maybe not for others. But you know, the government had the right to do it.
Greta, look at this picture. Is this at least a public relations failure? Not this one, but the previous picture of the agent with the arm drawn.
You know, it may be, Gene, because we keep putting it up on the screen, but it depends how you measure the success of this operation. If you measure the success of the operation in that the law was carried out and nobody was hurt, then you might have a different view of it. If we put that picture up and it looks like the gun is pointed at the child, we're terrorizing the child. Look, there's no easy, pretty way to do this. It would have been better to negotiate it. It's much better. This is an ugly picture. Yeah, this is bad PR.
Go ahead, Judy.
I want to ask you both about, you know, where the process is. Now, we've been told that Juan Miguel Gonzalez, Elian, his son, are going to stay in the United States. They're not going back to Cuba until the appeals process is exhausted. What exactly is that process from here on out?
Well, that's a good question, because what's going to happen on May 11th is that the 11th Circuit, May 20th, I believe, the 11th Circuit Court of Appeal will then have its hearing, and then presumably and hopefully they'll have a decision written within a few weeks. That decision could give Elian Gonzalez the right to apply for asylum to the INS, and then the INS makes that decision, and they would have to find that he, as a 6-year-old, is in great chance of being persecuted if he goes back to his country. I think he's a very difficult, Elian Gonzalez is a very difficult way to go to make out that kind of an argument. Theoretically, if it goes away, if it goes against the family could appeal to the Supreme Court. This could go on for a while.
You know what, the funny thing is that when Roger says, you know, that it starts with the hearing and we don't know when the decision is, I think that's what upsets so many people with our judicial system in the country. And Roger and I always talk about it. He always refers to it as my rant. But, you know, this is moving very slowly for very important matters, and the court does have the power to expedite. There are ways to speed it up, but unfortunately, justice moves very slowly in this country for people who are, you know, greatly affected by it.
And for that reason, we've been told that there are arrangements made for the Gonzalez, for Juan Miguel Gonzalez, Elian Gonzalez, to stay near Washington, and they're not telling us where yet, for this indefinite period. And they acknowledge, we talked to Greg Craig, Juan Miguel Gonzalez attorney earlier, he acknowledged this could be a long time.
This could be a long period of time if you play out all the various kinds of appeals that could go on by the family if in fact they're dissatisfied, and appeal to the Supreme Court. And Greta, you know that they take off during the summer. I mean,
yeah, that's my favorite, the 3 months they get off in the summer.
Yeah, but Greta wants that job, I think, to be at those 3 months.
That's right, I want those 3 months. But you know what's sort of interesting, Roger, is that by virtue of the fact that it drags out, there is one sort of little advantage to the family in Miami, is that maybe maybe the father will say, hey, this isn't such a bad place after all, the United States. Maybe I'll want to stay here with my son. So there's some sort of advantage. Maybe he'll like it better here.
Let's presume, however, that the father does intend to go back to Cuba. What is the darkest side of the situation? Is it a hypothetical situation in that the Florida family members string this out for 2 years, and all of a sudden they say, well, the boy is 8 now. He can speak for himself. He's no longer 6.
Well, you know, there is that problem, and the longer that he is here, and I think that's what Greta was perhaps talking about too, and the notion that perhaps the father will change his opinion too. You stretch it out for 2 years, and then he says 8, but they've already made that argument. They said, look, you know, the child's been with us for 4 months. You know, how can you take him away from us now? And it's almost a little bit like the Menendez brothers saying, look, we're orphans, you know, don't hurt us.
You know, one of the interesting aspects of this case is that we always look at it through our own eyes. And the people who have lived in Cuba, who came over here under very unfortunate circumstances, see Cuba very differently than people who haven't been there. And so there's a lot of emotion in this case. I mean, if you've been the victim of persecution, you're going to fight hard for this. And so for some people may not understand, you know, the passion of some of the people involved in this case.
We've been looking at pictures released just literally minutes ago by the government, pictures taken by U.S. Marshals at Andrews Air Force Base. First pictures released of Elian Gonzalez with his father, Juan Miguel, and with his little half-brother, Gianni. I want to ask you both again about the precedent, and this is what part of what's up in the air, the precedent for a 6-year-old. I mean, there was a point where we saw that video of young Elian Gonzalez saying into a video camera, "Daddy, I don't want to go back to Cuba. You may go, but you know, you should stay," in effect, in the United States. What precedence is there for a 6-year-old saying, "I don't want to go back to this country where I may be living in political persecution"? I
don't think that there is precedent for a 6-year-old. You know, traditionally across the law, all boundaries of the law, we don't allow 6-year-olds to make decisions. We make their parents make decisions for them. Now, we know about this case a few years ago where there was a young Russian boy, but he was 16. I just don't see a precedent in any part of the law for saying a 6-year-old can make a decision, a knowing decision, a good decision about his future or her future.
And I think when judges talk to 6-year-olds, or when lawyers do, you sort of try to read through that, because my guess is that we could probably do a video very different tonight. I mean, you know, this is a 6-year-old child, and when you examine the statements of a 6-year-old, if a 6-year-old is given a voice in any type of hearing at all, is you have to sort of read through what may be something that's a little bit manufactured and what's real.
And speaking of public relations disasters, not very many people had very much good to say about that video of the boy saying, "I don't want to go back to Cuba."
Well, that, you know, certainly was a public relations disaster. I mean, as a parent, one can, you know, you look with a certain amount of appallingness, if you will, of a little boy wagging his finger at his father.
I'm told that we have to go to a break, so we'll be back in just a moment. Stay with us. Welcome back to our continuing coverage of the Elian Gonzalez case and today's dramatic developments. This is a picture released by the federal government. The reunion of 6-year-old Elian Gonzalez with his father, Juan Miguel, with Juan Miguel's wife, and the young boy's step-brother, a 6-month-old baby. We're told by a witness to the reunion the boy was all smiles, that he was very affectionate toward his father, very happy, and that he played with his younger stepbrother, as you can see by that picture. Judy?
Actually, Gene, I also called him stepbrother a moment ago. He's actually half-brother, because the two have the same father.
I stand corrected.
So,
thank you, Judy.
Both of us stand corrected. Susan Candiotti has been outside the home of Elian Gonzalez relatives there in Miami. Susan, any reaction to these pictures that have just been released, pictures of Elian with his father and with his half-brother?
Yes, Judy, I just spent some time with some women who happened to be standing by our monitor and could see those photographs. And I pointed them out to one woman in particular and asked her what she thought about that. And she said in her words, "Well, I expected this to happen." And she said in her words, "I expect we'll be seeing more of this." Now, what did she mean by that? Well, leading up to that in our conversation, there is a fear that she expressed that is often heard repeated among many of the demonstrators here, and that is a fear that once this child goes back to his father, that he really won't be under the control of his father. They worry that, as they put it, the brainwashing, in their words, has already begun. So as there is considerable concern among many Cuban exiles here that this child will be reprogrammed, as they put it, by the Cuban government, and they worry that that he will somehow be turned against his mother, the mother who attempted to bring him to the United States but did not survive this journey. And even though these photographs appear to show a child that is indeed smiling and quite happy, photographs provided by the U.S. Marshal Service, as I understand it, these people are suspicious. but they have been suspicious of the government's motives throughout and remain suspicious about what will happen once this child goes back to Cuba. Now, the crowd here has dwindled considerably. There are still maybe 100 or so people, perhaps more, but there were several hundred here earlier this day. Now the demonstrators seem to be congregated mostly in front of the House, and others have left. It is indeed a very hot Florida day with the sun beating down on them. And many of the people here say that they plan to participate in another event being organized as we speak by Cuban exile leaders who say that they have nothing to do with some of the more violent scenes or disturbances that you have seen just a few blocks from here, where there were some fires set in a street, at a street corner. These people say they are planning to participate in what they call a peaceful demonstration early next week, as early as next Tuesday. But earlier, we did have some difficulty here out in front.